With that, we'll get started. My name is Hai Nguyen. I'm co-founder of Affluence, the company behind Prioritization. Today's webinar is on the crash course to Prioritization, and my goal is pretty simple: to help you understand how to use Prioritization and then how to get the most out of it, and then at the end of the day, how to become more productive. What I want to start with is a quote that's inspired me recently, and that's by Tony Robbins. It's not about time management, it's about misplaced attention. So what this really implies is that being productive is not about doing more, but it's about doing the right things. And here with Matrix, one of the things we want to make sure that we help our customers do is for them to actually be able to focus on those core tasks. So the goals of this introductory webinar is to, one, help you understand the basics of Matrix so then you can actually start using it right away, and then how to understand and apply what's called the Eisenhower Matrix, which is the core framework around prioritizing our time and our workload, and then walk you through the basics of prioritizing actual tasks, projects, and emails, and then basic collaboration features, and then lastly, how to use Matrix inside Microsoft Teams and Outlook, even though Matrix itself is a software that works across every single platform: Mac, Windows, web, mobile, and so forth. And then Matrix is also a modern work certified software and a Microsoft 365 security certified solution. In fact, we're the only solution that's Microsoft 365 certified across Teams, Outlook, and web. So in terms of the checklist I want to share with you today, many of you are probably using Matrix for the very first time. And the way I think about it is sort of like a three-phase process. The first, which is today, is about just getting started. Which is, making sure you're installing Matrix and you just get it going and so forth. But also, I want you to create your first personal and team project. And I'll explain what those really capture in a moment. And then lastly, for today, review what's important and urgent, right? When you think about the tasks that you have, start and you have to start somewhere. And so today's really is around creating that baseline. Then over the next week, what happens is that you become more comfortable with using Matrix, and then you can start reviewing Matrix with your team members, and then you can finally think about, okay, I understand my goals now, so what should I reprioritize? What are the things I should move around? And then also check in with your manager to ensure alignments. I think that's one of the most often a step that many people skip, which is when you think about your priorities, it's never within a vacuum, right? It's within the context of the team you work with, within the context of the organization that you're in. So there's so much more to that. So as you think about Matrix, look beyond just your own personal tasks, but look how it fits within the larger picture. And then over the course of a month, within 30 days of using Matrix, you're finally able to go and think about, reprioritizing your team, reprioritizing the work you do within the broader picture, and then create a habit of prioritizing your tasks and emails. And then lastly, eliminate time waster so then you can focus on what really matters. So Matrix itself is a comprehensive email priority and project management software. And we help with three different levels. The first is individuals. And to me, this is the most important because, if we can't help you prioritize your tasks as an individual, then nothing else matters. And so what Matrix does is it makes it very easy for you to go in and know exactly what you need to work on at this moment. And that's the key. And then as we help you prioritize your tasks, and then we help your teammates prioritize their tasks, what happens is that we end up helping you be aligned on the key projects and the key tasks. And, it's unfortunate, but what reality is that many of us are not as aligned as we think. We're all working in our own little silo. And then it's when you have those meetings where you sit down and suddenly you realize, wait a minute, I'm working on the wrong things, or my coworkers are working on the wrong things, or my direct reports are just spending their time chasing something that actually isn't important. And so as you can imagine, that happens all the time. And so Matrix creates a single source of truth across the organization. So then you can know exactly what everyone else is working on, and then whether or not it's the right things. And so I hope that as you think about Matrix, and as you get started today, you really reflect on how it fits in within the broader picture for your own work, but then also for your team and organizational work. Let's start with the fundamental concept behind Matrix. So there's a famous quote attributed to former President Eisenhower: What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important. And what I really like about this quote is that it really helps us understand that nothing is one-dimensional, right? And so let me give you an example. Let's just say I ask you to write down the 15 things you have to do. So go ahead and take out a piece of paper, write down those 15 things. Okay. Now I'll ask you the next question, which is, if you were to choose one thing to work on, which one would it be? Is it the one at the top of the list because that's what first came to your mind? Or is it the one that's last on that list because it's the last thing you wrote down? Or is it something arbitrary, something random in the middle? And so, as you can imagine, when we work with a to-do list, that's the challenge that we have. It's all one large list, and choosing it is extremely difficult. And what a lot of us end up doing is we either choose the top thing or the bottom thing for those exactly those two reasons I mentioned to you. So instead, I want you to take those 15 things and then ask the question, is this task important and is this task urgent? And so now, instead of actually having one long list, you actually have two dimensions attached to every single task, importance and urgency. So instead of a list, you have what's called the Eisenhower Matrix. And it's actually extremely simple. The important and urgent tasks, those are your high priority tasks. That's where you should focus your time. Now, the next part is actually a little bit more tricky. What tasks are medium priority? Are they the urgent but not important tasks just because they're urgent? Or are they important and not urgent? And so this is one of those challenges that a lot of people face when they come to, think about task management and then prioritizing their work. But my take is the following. We spend so much time working on urgent things just because they're urgent. And the problem there is that we actually get pulled away from the things that truly matter. So your medium important tasks, your medium priority tasks are actually the tasks that are important but not urgent. So what that means is if you're not fighting fires, you should be planning for the things that are important next. And then the low priority tasks are the things that are urgent but not important. And then finally, you shouldn't have anything that's not important and not urgent. And so that becomes your uncategorized. So that's your bucket, your inbox, right? So the 15 tasks essentially start on the bottom right, and then you move them into these quadrants. Now, as you can see, this is actually a very, very simple concept. And in fact, even if you don't use our software, adapting this philosophy, this mindset, as you think about your work is so fundamentally important. But here's where the value of Protomatrix comes in. I would ask you to also ask your coworkers to write down their 15 things and also bucketize them into these quadrants. And the magic happens when you go around the office and you compare notes. So the visualization I want you to take in here is imagine if you are walking around the office and every single person that you work with has this floating matrix above their head, and it tells you exactly what their priorities are. And what happens is that you will be aligned the vast majority of the time. Most of the tasks are pretty obvious on what's important and what's urgent, right? But once in a while, something in your quadrant one is not in someone else's quadrant one. They're in someone else's quadrant two or even three, and then vice versa. And that's when you actually spend your time and effort having the proper conversation with your coworkers. So the four quadrants Eisenhower matrix creates alignment because it forces you to prioritize from the beginning. You don't go and take two long lists of 15 items and compare them with each other because you're going to say, oh yeah, I agree. Those are the 15 things we got to do. But the difference is actually putting them into those various buckets. And the other thing is success from using Protomatrix isn't necessarily about finding out what everyone agrees on. It's discovering disagreements on what should be a priority when it isn't. And so when you think about Protomatrix and when you think about the work that you have to do, this is where we differentiate from every single other application out there. There are project management software, there are task management software, there's to-do lists and so forth. Plenty of options there. The difference with Protomatrix is that it forces you to draw the lines between what truly matters and what doesn't. And so I want you to think about this every time you use Protomatrix, which is where are you drawing the line and how are you doing it? And then if your coworkers are doing the same thing, how do you actually get to that alignment? And by the way, the honest truth is This is a challenge that affects me and a challenge that affects every customer that I talk to. It's never around us understanding what it is we need to work on. It's around how do we actually surface up the things that we have to work on right now, right? And so that's the whole point of Protomatrix as a software. So I do want to mention that the webinars are recorded, and so they're posted on our website. Please only follow this link, and don't follow any other link inside the chat there. And then also, if you have any questions, make sure you send them in the conversation afterwards. So now let's put this into practice. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Protomatrix software so you can actually see how it looks. So here I have my Protomatrix open. Now, Protomatrix works on every single platform. So in this case, you have Mac, Windows, web. So what that means, you can access Protomatrix from anywhere. And then also inside Microsoft Teams, inside Outlook, we even have Gmail extension, Chrome extension, Edge extension, iPhone, Android apps. And so you can imagine that Protomatrix is everywhere. And the reason it's everywhere is because you want to know what it is you need to work on when, like right now, right? Not you don't have to be at your desktop to find out your task. So as you can see on the left-hand side, I have what's called my projects. So with Protomatrix, essentially, I want to say that you don't have to be afraid to create projects. And there are three types of projects. The first is what's called a transient project, which means it has a starting point and an end point. An example of that might be a construction project, right? So you have starting today, and it's going to be done in 18 months. And so every single task that you have would go from, you have these tasks created in the various buckets and so forth, but at the end of all that, everything is done. Then you archive the project and you're good to go. The second type of project is what's called persistent projects. These are things that stick around forever or for a very long time. So for example, a project called My Personal Priorities. So I recommend that all of you create this, when you start in Protomatrix. This is a project that always exists, and tasks may come and go, but you always go back to this project to review maybe, the things that you're thinking about. Another example of a persistent project, and it's actually for our company, is we have a project for every single one of our application. So our Mac app, Windows app, web app, and so forth all have their own set of priorities. And so as you can imagine, that list or that matrix is always growing as opposed to diminishing. And then the third and last type of project is what's called repetitive projects or templates or recurring projects. So as an example, let's just say you need to onboard a customer. And so with Protomatrix, you're actually able to create these templates that can essentially spawn, and then you onboard a customer starting today and over the course of 2 weeks or something like that. So those are the three types of projects. So as you can see here, I have a series of projects. I click on my personal priorities project, and here the 4 quadrants is front and center. And that's what I want you to appreciate around Protomatrix, which is, the whole point of the software is to help you prioritize and to help visualize those priorities. And so, when customers use Protomatrix, this is also a place where people struggle. They struggle because they say, wait a minute, I don't know where it goes. I don't know if it's high priority or medium priority. I just want a list. And that's what everything else is for, right? You have plenty of ways to create that list, but the difference in using the matrix is to put down, essentially make a stance on where it all fits in. And here's the thing, you can change your mind, you can disagree, you can have a conversation with others and reprioritize, but at the very beginning, you're really, really putting it down into this matrix so then you know exactly what the priorities are. So let's start it with an example. Down here, there's a button that says add item. I'll go ahead and click on it. I'm going to go and say follow up with webinar participants. Okay, so this is certainly something I have to do. So I'm going to follow up with webinar participants. But with Protomatrix, one thing I can do is use natural language. I'm going to go in and say due tomorrow at 2 p.m. So as you can see, I can actually continue to create a series of tasks very, very easily in Protomatrix. But here with this task that I've created, Protomatrix create the task for me, but because I said due tomorrow 2 p.m., it actually sets a due date for me tomorrow, 2 p.m. my local time. So for you, you also would create the due date in your local time. Now, one thing that's really interesting here is the importance of due dates. In my opinion, if you have an important task, they should always have a due date. And the reason is simple. If you want to know whether something is urgent or not, you have to know where it fits in within the broader picture of all the tasks that you have. So my strong recommendation to all of you when you use Matrix is when you create the task, just use natural language to set that due date. It's really, really straightforward, and it's so easy because you can type 15 tasks in 30 seconds, and you have all the due dates already in place. And you can say, due in 2 weeks, due in, for 3 hours, anything along those lines. Now, on the right-hand side, we'll call the item details. So you have the task name here. You can add an icon to the task, and so just a way to categorize the task in Matrix, let you generate reports or also sort by those icons. You can star a task, which puts it at the very top of every single quadrant. And then down here, you have a couple of other things. You can actually take this task and assign to another person, to other people. And so as you can see here, my project is called My Personal Priorities, but in reality, with Matrix, I can actually delegate tasks to anybody across all of my Matrix. And then I have progress, efforts, reminders, and due dates. Now, if you are an entity where you actually have to generate reports on how many hours you work on a specific task, that's what the effort is for. Matrix will go ahead and let you generate reports later on how much effort you spend in every single project and so on. But there's a big difference between due dates and reminders, and I really want to emphasize this. One, due dates is when something is due, right? And so imagine you have something that's really big, a project that will take you, 3 days worth of work, and it's due next Friday. Now, if you wait until next Friday to get started, there's no way you get that done. So what you do is you actually set a reminder ahead of time. But the way it works with Matrix is actually I can set recurring reminders. So I can go ahead and click Remind Me Daily. And now what this does is it actually sets me a recurring reminder to work on this task. And the strategy that I recommend to people is the following. One, set recurring reminders because it helps you overcome the challenges when you have too many things that are urgent that's pulling away your attention. Now, let me try to give you a different example. So imagine, I get a couple hundred emails per day. So I imagine many of you get a lot of emails as well. So when you go and you check your email, which email do you tend to look at first, right? The most important? No, because you don't know which one it is, but you end up looking at the last email in more often than not. And so when you get an email, and if someone follows up, and then they follow up again, then they follow up again, and this is typically the case of like spam emails or marketing emails or whatever, but the reason why you end up thinking about it or looking at it, because it keeps on popping back up. You can think of reminders as the exact same thing, but it's a way to ensure that you work on the most critical tasks. So for me, I always set a due date for my critical task, and then I always set a recurring reminder, so then it stays top of mind. So I strongly recommend those two features. And so when you use Matrix, if you use almost no other features, make sure you set those due dates and reminders. Down here, I have the chat, which is where it's a record of the conversation. I can actually have a whole communication with my coworkers directly in this chat. And it also serves as a history of all the changes. The reason why I think the chat is useful is because it stays within the context of the item, right? Let me give you a different example. So imagine you probably use, Microsoft Teams or some other communication software, and you work with a coworker and you're chatting with them about all sorts of stuff, which is great. You have a really fluid conversation. It works well. The problem is 3 months from now, you need to pull in a new person to work on the task, and they have zero context. They don't know what's been talked about. They don't know the decisions made, the priorities change. So the way it works in the chat in Matrix is that it serves as that record. So then what happens is later on, if I need to assign this task to a third person, they can actually go in and see the full history of everything here, able to know what are the priorities that's been changed, the due dates have been changed, and so forth. So that's the way you can think about chat and why it's useful. The note section for the matrix actually let you create subtasks here, and also basic notes. And then also actually a sort of a time-saving tip we have is that we have a fill with AI feature where it essentially creates subtasks for you, so then you can actually just mark them off really easily. And then lastly, the resources section is where you can attach additional context. So as an example, it could be files, documents. For example, in this case, when I say follow up with webinar participants, I might upload the email list of all the people who are attending today, right? So that's an example. And then also I can actually upload an email, a draft of the email, or links to other resources. Matrix actually integrates really, really deeply with so many other resources that allows you to actually pull in links and so forth from SharePoint or from any website that you're browsing. And so I'll highlight that in just a moment. But the resources section is where you can actually add all the context that you need. Okay, so now let's go back to this 4 quadrants here. I created the task on the bottom right, and I'll go ahead and drag it to the top left because it's high priority. Okay, so it's a start item, so I'll go ahead and unstar it, and I'll drag it to the top left here. So now I've reprioritized this task. So when I start my day, one of the things I do is actually, my project gets pretty long. And so what I do is I actually resize the quadrants. And so now I'm able to look at all my high priority tasks directly within this view. Now, one of the things that you can do in Matrix is actually switch view. Now, I mentioned the quadrants over and over again because it's the most important thing in Matrix. But actually, sometimes you can go to what's called the list view if you want to see sort of more like an Excel style list. One thing that's very useful about this view is it helps you find overdue items really rapidly, because if anything's overdue, it actually turns red. So from your perspective, you can say, oh, wait, I was supposed to work on this 2 weeks ago. I haven't done it yet. And it shows right here. And when you go to the filter option on the top right here, you can actually select and choose and add additional columns into your view. And that allows you to actually sort all the information that you have and be able to see all the tasks that you have right here. Now, one really powerful feature about Matrix is the ability to generate email reports. And so here, let's just say I have these tasks. What I can do is I can select all and go back here, and I can go to share, and I can choose email items. And when I do that, what Matrix will do is it actually will generate an Outlook email for me that I can use to send to another person. So as you can see, it opens Outlook, generate the email for me with all the tasks and the status of that task directly from here. So in my opinion, the reason why this is a useful feature in Matrix is because as you use Matrix, as you're tracking your priorities, sometimes it's important for you to communicate that to others. And they may not be using Matrix, right? It could be an external party, or it could be your manager or your executive and so forth. It's also useful if you need to generate a report of all the work that you've done to put into your workload, your performance review. So that's an example where some of these features are actually pretty helpful. And so up here, I have the list view, then I have what's called the Kanban view. And actually, the Kanban view is very useful for what's called a transient project that we talked about earlier. The reason is it takes all the tasks that you have and shows into 3 distinct buckets: the to-dos, the things in progress, and things that are done. So as a project manager, sometimes a screenshot of this is all you need to update your stakeholders on the work that you've done. And then finally, you have the calendar view, and then also the Gantt chart view, where it gives you a much longer term horizon of everything that you have to do within your particular projects. So as you can see with Matrix, the quadrant view is the most powerful, but at the same time, you're able to get whatever information that you need depending on the context of your work. So now let's talk about projects in general. So as you, on the left-hand side here, there's a couple things. One, I have projects that are pinned and projects that are starred, and then projects that are modified. And so Matrix automatically surface up projects that are relevant to you based on the modification dates. But I'll show you how to create a project. I mentioned that all of you should create a personal project, but also the other thing I want you to do is create what's called a team priority project. And to do that, you go ahead and create project. And when you go to create project, you have a couple of choices. The first is always a blank project, right? So for example, when it comes to creating projects, you should go here and create a personal priority, right? Just like what we talked about earlier, or team priorities. So you can do something like that. And so you just simply type in the name of the project, and then you can actually choose the different template types. And so in my recommendation, just stick with the basic matrix, which is the Eisenhower matrix, and then choose a color code and add project. The color itself doesn't really affect the functionality, but it's just a visual way of organizing the work that you have. So maybe, engineering is one color, or marketing is one color, and so forth. So that's how you create a project in Matrix. But what you can also do is you can use what's called public templates. So here at Affluence, we've generated something like 1,000 templates for you to use. And so these are all free for you to use. Eisenhower Matrix is just one template, but you can do something like the 30, 60, 90-day plan. which is a way to actually convert your matrix into 4 distinct buckets for you to plan every single quarter. And so it's a very helpful way for managers to make sure that they stay on task every single quarter. And then also, as you use Matrix, you can actually save your own templates. So if you go to My Templates, these are the saved templates across your team. Let me give you an example. Employee onboarding. So if you have 30 tasks that every new employee has to do, which means, include um, reading, training, or reading certain documents or signing documents or whatever, you can actually create all those tasks in Matrix, prioritize them, set a due date, save it as a template. Then when you go to onboard an employee, you simply click on employee onboarding, choose their start date, and Matrix will automatically create all the due dates for you for that particular person moving forward. So that's an example of the share templates that you have within your own team. And then also you have the ability to create project using our AI system. It'll automatically create the tasks and due dates for you. And then also the ability to import CSV. One neat feature with Matrix is the ability to export everything that you have into a format you can use, and you open an Excel and you can create pivot tables and so forth. But it also allows you to create your own custom CSV within Excel that you can import back into Matrix. Our goal is to simplify and actually to make it as easy as possible for you to work with your existing workflow and still pull that data into Matrix. So that's how you create projects in Matrix. Essentially, you have many, many different options. And as you can see here, I have, like a few dozen projects. In my actual work account, I have more than 300 projects. So I want to mention that, you don't have to be scared to create different projects in Matrix. A project essentially has its own 4 quadrants, and those are the ways in which you can think about how to prioritize. Anything that deserves its own set of priorities deserves its own project, right? So if you are a manufacturing manager and you're working at multiple plants, every single one of those plants should be its own project. So that's an example. So for every single one of you here in this webinar, my recommendation essentially is: 1, create a project, personal priorities, create a project for your team priorities that you can actually go and share on the screen when you guys are in a meeting. Imagine, you walk into the office and you have a staff meeting, and you're going around the office and you're asking everyone what they're working on. The biggest challenge, and the challenge I've seen over and over again, is people just talk about the things that are top of mind. They're not talking about the things that are important. It's just whatever happened 2 hours ago, or whatever happened yesterday, as opposed to the most important task that may not have been touched for the past 2 weeks, right? And so when you project the Matrix priorities, team priorities onto the screen, it helps you focus on the most important task. So then everyone can actually go and talk about the things that's in quadrant 1, regardless of whether or not it's, it's urgent or it's been recently touched. And so that will help your meetings become much more effective. And then also, I recommend creating projects for your your personal goal, in particular, like getting a promotion. And so that's where the AI goal creation in Matrix is actually very powerful, because it will sort of create a list of goals specific to your job function. All you have to do is type it into the system, and Matrix will generate those tasks for you. So that's my recommendation in terms of creating projects. And so once you have those projects in place, you can start creating those tasks, start prioritizing them, set those due dates, set those reminders, so you know exactly what it is you need to work on. So let's switch gear a little bit and talk about email management. That's probably the #1 reason why a customer comes to Matrix. So if you happen to use Outlook, Matrix has one of the best email integrations within the Microsoft ecosystem. So let's just say you get an email, and that email is very important. And then also you can't respond to the email right away, because whatever, you might have to do all the work, or you need to follow up from your coworkers or teammates, etc. So what do you do when you have that important email? You flag the email. That's what I do a lot of times. You mark the email as unread, and then you hope that you'll get back to it. The only problem with all of this is, if you have 5 flag emails, that's fine. If you have 50 flag emails, you're in trouble, right? And so there's a famous quote that says, if everything is important, then nothing is important. If every email is flagged, then no emails is effectively flagged. And so one of the things you can do with Matrix is the following. You can actually go to your email, click on apps here, and open our Outlook extension called Turn Emails into Tasks. And so this is an extension for Outlook. And when you do that, you can actually choose Prioritize Email. When you choose prioritize email, it actually lets you take this email and convert it into a task inside Matrix. It automatically grabs the subject to put an item name. You can change this as needed. Then you can choose what project it goes in. So as an example, maybe it's an email from a customer, a certain customer, right? Then you can choose that customer, and then you can also decide what quadrant it goes in. So suddenly your email is not just flagged, it's actually categorized within a specific project, and then you can even assign this to another person right here and go ahead and set a due date 2 weeks from now and click capture. So what Matrix does is it takes that email, gets the full context of that email, create a task, assign to a person, set a due date, and then put it into the appropriate quadrants. And so you can imagine in this scenario, I'm not dropping this email. It's going to come back. It shows up in my calendar. My coworkers will actually get a task delegated to them, and then they're able to see that. And not only that, the email itself is uploaded into the resources section, so they can actually click on this email file, open the email, and respond to it. But furthermore, you guys can have a full conversation around that email directly within this task. So instead of just forwarding an email to your coworker and hoping that they also get to see the email, you've converted into a task and you have the full context of Matrix that they can use. So this is a really powerful way to use our Outlook integration. But sometimes you actually get an email that's really a follow-up. So Matrix is the only application that I'm aware of that lets you do this, which is instead of choosing to prioritize the email, you can attach an email to an existing task instead. So once you go back to here, you search for the Matrix item, and then you hover over it, and then you choose attach. So now Matrix allows you to take multiple emails and put it into the same action item. And then, as you can imagine, you can go ahead and put your draft documents or your proposals or links to SharePoints, etc., all in one centralized place. So your coworkers will all be on the same page. And that's the power of using the Outlook extension inside Matrix. Now, if you use Outlook for web, actually one thing that's neat is Matrix works completely inside Outlook as well. So if you go to the bottom left here, you can also install Matrix. Now, Matrix is what's called a universal app. So what that means is it works as a web application directly inside Teams and Outlook. So once you install that, and by the way, it's different from the email extension. So you have to install both. But I can actually access my entire Matrix right here inside Outlook. So if I'm an Outlook junkie, I never have to actually leave Outlook at all. I can actually access everything that I need without leaving Outlook. Now, when I open Matrix here, a couple things I want to point out, which is if you go to the inbox, you actually have what's called a secret inbox address. Every single one of you has a unique secret inbox address. If you send an email to that secret inbox address, it'll create a task. So for those who are on mobile devices all the time, copy the secret inbox address, save it as a contact on your phone. So for me, for example, I use Apple Mail. I don't use Outlook on my iPhone. I use Apple Mail. So I save the contact as a secret inbox address. Whenever I get an email that's important and I'm out and about, again, I don't flag it. I forward it into my secret inbox. And then I just say in the body, due tomorrow, remind me daily as 2 separate lines, and Matrix turns that email into a task with a due date and also set a reminder for me. Extremely powerful way to track your tasks and your emails while you're on the road. So that's the secret inbox right here. I highly recommend that you save as a contact for your team. Now, earlier, I assigned tasks to my coworkers. One of the things I want to point out to you here is how do you know what you need to work on, right? And so I'm still in Outlook, but as you can see, I have the full Matrix web application. I have this thing called New Assignments. When I click on that, it actually tells me all the tasks that's been assigned to me recently. So this is essentially, these are new assignments, the one that just got assigned to me. If I click on this right now, the task will go away. And so that means, I've seen the task, and my coworker will know that I've seen the task as well. So when you assign tasks to other people, essentially Matrix ensures that they know they got a new assignment. And so if you go into Matrix and you're working with other people, keep an eye on that. The second is what's called mentions. So mentions essentially is a way for you to get someone's attention within the task. So I'll show you an example of how that works. So I'll go my personal priorities here, and go ahead and take a task. What I can do on the bottom left here is click on this plus, and then I can mention someone here. So then I can go ahead and mention a coworker and said, can you take a look at this? And so now this is actually different from an assignment, because assignment is where they actually have be the owner of the task, but a mention is where you actually just want to keep them updated on the task. And so as the task gets updated and progress is made, they'll get notified. And so that's how mention works. And then also, if you have tasks that are due today or this week, Matrix will actually show up in what's called your agenda. And so here I can see the tasks I have to do today, the tasks I have to do tomorrow, the things that are yesterday, and everything else that's overdue. Now, to access the agenda, you can also go to what's called the home view. When you go to the home view, you get see a couple of different things. The first is alerts, and these are all the tasks that requires your attention. So when we talked earlier around making sure that you work on the right things, well, this is where you start your day. When you go to Matrix, alerts tells you where you should spend your time, right? And so the most important is one, looking at your new assignments, or two, looking at where people mentioned you, which means they need your attention. And then also all those tasks and due dates that we've created, they show up here as well. So as you can see, all the star tasks are at the very top. So you star those most important items, and then you'll know that, oh, wait a minute, it's due soon, right? Or there's a reminder for me to work on this. Then I can go to my agenda, and again, this shows everything. But one powerful way you can do the filter is changing from item I own to item I follow. So if you are someone who gets delegated a lot of tasks, you just need to know what it is you need to work on today. Therefore, in this view, you go to items I own. But if you're a manager and you assign a lot of tasks to others, you want to know what everyone's schedule is like. So when you go to here, instead of choosing item I own, you choose items I follow, and now you get to see the agenda for everyone that you work with for this week. So as you can imagine, the way it works with Matrix is it actually aggregates all this information across all of your matrices, and then all of the priorities that you have, and pull it in one centralized place. So then if you have tasks with due dates, it shows up right here in the agenda, and then also helps you prioritize it within the context of start items, or within the context of quadrants. So when you think about Matrix, um, the hardest part is really deciding which quadrant the task go in, right? And then also setting those due dates. And my personal advice for all of you is, don't worry about setting the wrong due dates or putting the wrong quadrants. You can always change it. But the key is to make sure that those most important tasks do have those proper tags. Therefore, they'll show up inside your matrix. So let me recap what happens when you use Matrix every single day. That you use Matrix, you go in here and essentially you look at those two places, the alerts view and the agenda view. And again, it'll tell you everything that's relevant to you, tasks that were assigned to you, the status of tasks that were assigned to others, and so on. So that's why they're here. And then as you look at these, they'll go away. And so if you don't have any new assignments, this particular button will go away. If no one mentioned you in anything, this goes away. So it's a very easy way to focus on your key task. So that's how that works right here. Now, one thing that you can do in Matrix, I'm gonna go ahead and switch back to the web view here, is go to what's called the global view. So we've been talking about projects and so forth, but one thing that's really powerful is what's called the one-on-one view. So when you use Matrix, you can actually choose a coworker. So let's just say if you're a manager, you can go to here, click on one-on-one, and select one of your direct reports. Matrix automatically generate a full list of all the tasks you have in common with that person across all of Matrix. And so if you have a one-on-one, one of the biggest challenges people tend to have in meetings and so forth is just going through and figuring out what should we talk about. And so instead of having to worry about all that, you go to the one-on-one during your meeting, select the person, you look at this list together and say, okay, hey, I see all these tasks we have. I see these tasks that are overdue and across all these different projects. Should we change the priorities? Should we change the due dates? Or maybe you finished it, but you didn't mark it as done. So let's mark it as done. And then also you can actually add share tasks directly from here, where it automatically assigns the task to your coworker, automatically adds you as a follower, and you can choose what project it goes in. So This is probably one of the top features that people find extremely valuable, especially for managers and especially for people who work with other people. So if you find that you do a lot of delegation, or you have a lot of one-on-one meetings, be sure to check this out. This is what makes Matrix really unique, because it's a way to aggregate all this information. And then not only that, let's just imagine a scenario where your coworker is going to go on vacation or is on leave for a month. Well, what do? Guess what? You go to this one-on-one view, you sort by due dates, right? And so you can find out all the tasks that are going to be due real soon, and you do the following. You go here, you start selecting items, or you can even select all. If someone's leaving the organization, you go to here, you select all instead. But let's just say I have tasks that are overdue. I need to assign to another person. I just select it from here, and as you can see, it actually spans across multiple projects. Then I go to here, I can click on edit, and then I change owner, and boom, just like that, I've assigned the task to somebody else. So as a manager, this is an extremely powerful way to ensure that your tasks are not falling behind schedule, and also, being able to bulk delegate to other people really, really quickly. And again, this is the same view where you can select all the items and then you can generate that email report or calculate billable hours and so forth. It's really interesting because everything we do in reporting is actually automatic. So what I mean by that is you don't have to worry about tracking all these little things and updating them. Instead, you're just working. You're just creating tasks, updating tasks, and marking tasks as done in Matrix, which will take care of the rest. So make sure that as long as you capture those tasks and prioritize them and set those due dates, everything else is done by our system. So that's called the one-on-one view. And when you combine that with the filter, it's extremely powerful, because you can actually go to here and then you can actually sort, by projects, sort by due dates, or change all sorts of other filters here. And then you can even save your filter as a custom filter. So Matrix lets you do all of those things. Now, the next thing I want to show you is what's called the search view. So this is what's called the master view. This gives you access to all tasks across all projects in Matrix. As you can see, it shows you all the things assigned to everybody. Here, you can actually click on filters, filter what you need, or click on My Items, and Matrix will show you all the tasks you have across all of Matrix. And again, you can see all those due dates and so forth. If you go to Filter and you change to Finish Items, then it will actually generate a report for you of all the tasks you finished across all projects. Very useful way to update your performance reports, right? Then you have the calendar view. So Matrix lets you actually generate a calendar of all your projects. And you can go to projects here and even choose which projects you want to include or not include. And you can even combine that with filters. So again, from a manager standpoint, you might want to ask the question, hey, what are all the things that are important and urgent? So you go to here, choose quadrant 1, and now suddenly you have a calendar across all of Matrix, across all projects, of all the important and urgent tasks. So as you can see, it's a very easy way to actually be on top of your task and making sure that people are working on them and making sure that people are updating them. So that's a calendar view. Then you have the Gantt chart view, and the Gantt chart view actually aggregate all the information. But the difference between the calendar and the Gantt chart is the calendar is good for seeing things that are due in a week or maybe even a month, but the Gantt chart is very good for seeing things that are due across quarters and years. So here I go to this view, as you can see, I can zoom out and suddenly I can actually see tasks across all my projects all the way through 2028, right? And so if you're a project manager, sometimes all you need is a screenshot of this, and Matrix will actually let you download this as an SVG file that you can paste into your presentation. Again, all of this is generated automatically, and you can actually set dependencies and so forth as needed. And then lastly, Matrix has what's called workload reports. And so you can actually go and see people's workload and ensure that no one has too much on their plates. So a very useful way to do that. I'm going to switch gear now and show you how Matrix works inside Microsoft Teams. So as I mentioned, Matrix is a universal app. So if you click on apps here, you can install Matrix. And then once you do that, you can pin it on the left-hand side. Looks just like the web app. Only difference is it's completely inside Teams, so you don't even have to, exit the application or switch windows. But one thing that really makes Matrix unique is actually the following. One, we have the Matrix chatbot. And this is where it sends you those notifications and reminders on the work that you have. But you can also have a conversation with it. You can say, what do I have to do this week, et cetera. And Party Matrix will send you that information. But if you work with coworkers and you have conversation with them, you can actually take any conversation you have with a person and convert it into a task. So here, for example, my coworker and I might be talking about a certain task. I can click on the dot, dot, dot here, create PM item, and Matrix will take that conversation and convert it into a task for you. Very useful way to capture all these things that you're talking about. I mentioned how you might have a conversation inside Microsoft Teams. Well, suddenly you don't have to open Matrix, find a project, create a task, invite your coworkers, etc. You can do it directly here. And then not only that, you can actually add the one-on-one view directly inside Microsoft Teams with your coworker. Simply click on this plus icon here, choose Matrix, and then choose one-on-one view, and Matrix will let you add the one-on-one view with every single one of the people that you work with. So imagine if you're a manager and you have 5, or 10 direct reports, you don't have to worry about going to Matrix and clicking through all these projects. Matrix will bring that into Teams for you automatically. And so when you have a meeting, it is incredibly efficient because you can just go to one-on-one view, add share task, assign something to somebody directly from here without doing any of those extra steps. And then not only that, as I mentioned to you, if you use the natural language proficiently, then you can actually save a lot of time there as well because it automatically adds you as a follower. So then you can go to the agenda view and know what everyone's agenda is. So that's a one-on-one view here. So Matrix actually has also 3 versions. As you can see here, I have the HIPAA version for healthcare life sciences. We also have a government cloud solution as well for those in that are state and local government. So, but Matrix inside Teams and Outlook works across all of those platforms. So that's why I want to show you inside Microsoft Teams. We actually have a bunch of other integrations in Teams as well. We're probably the most integrated solution in Teams. So as you can see, you can actually you can attach Matrix action cards and so forth directly inside here. So I'm going to step back a little bit and talk about the other integrations that exist in Matrix. Matrix has an Outlook integration, as we saw, but also an Edge integration, a Chrome integration, and also a Safari integration. So one really useful example of this is the following. So let's just say if you don't use Outlook and you use Gmail instead, and then you actually have an email from Google or something like that, and then there's a part of that email you want to create a task. You can actually select any text, right-click on it, choose Matrix, and then choose Save Selection to Matrix or take screenshots. And Matrix will actually take anything that you're looking at and create a task for you. Very useful if you're browsing the web and you have all these things that you're seeing. Oh, hey, I got to read this or I got to capture this. Matrix will let you capture that seamlessly. Very, very powerful. But of course, we also have a Gmail integration where you can convert an email in Gmail into a task. So if you find that you're actually using Matrix a lot and you want to be able to capture information much more readily, make sure you install our Edge, Chrome, or Safari extension for that reason. Okay, let's go back to Matrix because I want to wrap this up and go back to the presentation. So again, when you're inside Matrix, make sure that you spend time in the home view because this tells you where you need to work. Make sure that you create a project for your personal priorities, your team priorities, and then also, whatever key initiative that you're working on. And then the one advice I want to remind everyone is ask your coworkers to also create their own Matrix and compare notes. I guarantee you that simple exercise that you do once a week will pay so much dividends because it creates alignment within your team. And not only that, it surfaces misalignments that you didn't know you had, right? Because everyone sort of goes on their way, they're thinking about their tasks, they're working on their things, but never do they realize that, wait a minute, maybe it doesn't matter. There's so many examples that I can think of where, people are working so hard on something and it doesn't make an impact because it's not important to the rest of the organization. So the best way to overcome that is to have a Matrix for every single person and then have a Matrix for the team and just be on the same page. So then anyone can log into Matrix, look at the team priorities, and get complete alignment. And if you do that, and almost like nothing else in Matrix, I think you'll find a ton of value. Okay, so let's go back into my presentation and let's just a couple of tips to shortcut your success. If you're a manager, create that team staff meeting project and screen share it. So whether or not you're in the same room or you're doing on, on meeting software, just screen share it so that you can talk through. And the key is to focus on the task in quadrant one. And if you find that you're not talking about the task in quadrant one, then reprioritize. That's it, right? They're very, very simple because that's where you should be spending your time. If you manage a lot of sites or locations or initiatives, create a project for every site or location. Matrix actually lets you create what's called dashboard projects, where you can actually create a project that links to other projects, and you're able to prioritize every single project itself too. And so you saw how, you have the projects for that you can pin or star. Well, you can actually create all these other cascading um, projects as well. It's sort of like a fractal. If you're following some specific training program or initiative, then create a project template. So that's the third type of project, right? The transient, the persistent, and then the template. And then if you're a business owner, create a project for each of your department. This is actually very straightforward. I work with a lot of other business owners. If you have 50 to 200 employees, it's actually very, Matrix extremely powerful because it allows you to have complete overview of everything that's happening across your entire company, something that couldn't be done before. And then if you're an individual contributor, if you plan to use Matrix just by yourself, make sure you create a project for your personal goals, but also for your promotion request. And you can use our AI to generate the task there. But the whole point of that is, you know, I've talked to so many people and even my colleagues, when it comes to like the final performance review, you're spending so much time digging through emails, digging through your to-do list, looking at your paper and sticky notes and all that. Well, with Matrix, you just go to select finish, finish items, completed items, choose the time span, choose the relevant project if needed, click generate email report, and Matrix will generate all that for you and just copy and paste that. So easy and saves you so much time and effort. Literally will cut a day worth of work into minutes. So what to do now? If you use Microsoft Teams and Outlook, definitely install our apps there. I do recommend our desktop app, our Windows app and Mac app, because then Matrix will send you notifications of task and notification of assignment and so forth. And initially, it's important that Matrix is top of mind for you. What that means is that at the end of the day, we only have so much mind share, right? We can only work on or think about so many things at a time. So by having Matrix always present, then you can think about your priorities. And it's a good habit to build. And then create a project highlighting your priorities. Make sure you set those due dates and reminders for your most critical task. Ask your colleagues to do the same. If you could do that, I think you'll find tremendous amount of value. And then the last advice here is, depends on how much time you want to invest, but my general recommendation is set 1 hour per week dedicated to reviewing your priorities. Again, we spend so much time doing the things that we do. We spend so little times asking whether or not we should be doing that. So that's all you're doing here. 1 hour every single week, look at your priorities, get a big picture of what it is you're working on, then you can focus. This is something that affects me. I have so many things on my plate, so many things I want to do. I have to constantly review, and it's so critical because sometimes I find myself sort of drifting off, working on something that's not relevant, right? But the key is to pull it all back together. And then lastly, just sit down and compare Matrix with your coworkers. That analogy I mentioned in the beginning, walking around the office and seeing a 4 quadrant float over everyone's head, that's the magic, right? Being able to see that will give you unprecedented visibility into what everyone is working on. Okay, so what success should look like with Matrix? You're checking Matrix every week to remind yourself of your goals. You have one centralized place to track priorities. At the team level, you guys are finally aligned on the key task, and it's okay to have misalignment. If you are arguing with each other over the task, you're doing it right. And don't let it silently fall into the background. And then also, if you have a lot of emails, prioritize those emails like I showed you, and then make sure that you can be able to see everyone's priorities in real time asynchronously. That's pretty much it. So if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to send them in the chat, or you can always send me an email to hi@affluence.com. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I see a couple of questions here. All right, I'm going to go through this list. So there's a question around being able to see all chats outside of the task context. That's an interesting question. So the conversations, the chats is within the context of every task. So let me go back to this view and I'll show you what I mean here. So as you can see, for example, if I click on a task right here, the chat here is within the context of every task. But if you go to a project, there's something called the project feed, and this gives you an overview of all the changes across the project, but it doesn't tell you the changes across all tasks within all projects, right? And so it's really layers upon layers, and so therefore there's no one centralized place to see the feed across everything. You can have what's called a global feed, and so this will show you a lot of changes, but there's a couple of elements that are sort of like grouped together in the global feed. Otherwise, it's way too much in a large team. But the global feed might be a good place for you to start if that's what you're thinking about. And so that has the chat across all the tasks. And also, you see how earlier I had this task where I said, can you take a look at this? It shows up here. But if you type a bunch of comments over and over again within a single project, it groups them together. And then the question is, how do these chats integrate with the Teams project channel? So it's actually really interesting. So if you go back to Teams here, there's a couple of ways for you to integrate, but what happens is that this chat right here with, let me see, go to a project here. If you go to inside every single project, you can add Matrix, and when you add Matrix, you can actually let it post updates into your general post. In my I generally don't recommend doing that for every single one of your project. Then you end up having multiple places where you have to look up things. But in general, what you can do is you can go to a channel, you can integrate a Matrix project within the channel, and then turn on the subscription for updating Matrix inside that channel. Can chats be moved to a different project, a different task? That's actually a really great question there. Being able to have that conversation across different tasks. The answer is no, mostly because the chat within every task is meant to be a sort of a permanent record. Because the problem is if you can easily delete and move that, then it sort of ruins the history of the item. But if you go to a task, there's a couple of ways to get around that though. The first is you can use the notes instead. So if you use the notes, and obviously you can copy and paste. And then also, if you use the notes, Matrix will let you do the version control. And so if you go to version control here, you can see the changes for this particular task over the entire lifetime of the task. So if you add something and then you undo it and so forth, Matrix will let you keep that record. But that's a great question. In fact, that's something that happens to us all the time too. Sometimes I send a message in the wrong chat. But if you send a message and you sort of catch that early on, right when you send that message, you have the ability to sort of delete that comment at that moment. So that's how you get around that. Is there a way to change the default view when clicking on a project? So actually, this is really interesting. So there isn't a way for you to switch to the default view on a per project basis. But what you can do instead is if you go to, you see how when I select a project here, it actually the URL changes. So for example, it says list versus matrix versus Kanban. You can actually save this link. So one strategy is actually you go and you create like a Chrome view, and there you essentially have a bunch of tabs that points exactly to the project that you care about, to exactly the view that you care about, and then you save that as a bookmark, all of those things. So it's actually really useful because then when you're ready to start Matrix, you open that bookmark, it opens all the projects for you exactly to the view that you want. It's sort of a workaround, but that works real well. Can columns be added to the Kanban view? The answer is no currently. So the reason is it's just, instead of thinking the Kanban view as boards, it's really just these three categories. So part of Matrix, the core focus of Protomatrix remains the 4 quadrants. And so, people have asked, can you have more than the 4 quadrants? And our answer is also no, unfortunately. But when you go to here, essentially these are the columns that you see. And so can we include external resources? Yes, you can actually include external resources. Actually, there's several ways. And so I assume when you say resources here, you mean external collaborators. So Protomatrix, when you use Protomatrix, you actually, let's just say you have a license for Protomatrix, you can allocate the license to internal users, but also what's called guest users. So as an example, we have an accounting customer. They have external clients. Each of them are, their clients. They actually add those users as guest users. Then for every single project, you can actually share that with those guest users. So when you go to a project here, when you click on this plus, you see how I can actually choose internal members, but I can also choose external members as well and put them by email. Now, my recommendation is to actually make sure that you properly license those people, because then you can actually make sure that, they're guest, and so their emails don't all show up within all your collaborator lists. So that's how you do it. But that you can certainly invite external people. In fact, for every task that you have, you can even assign the task to somebody who's not in the project. So the way it works with Matrix is if you're inside a project, so again, when I go to project here, I can invite team members or assign it to user groups. If you're inside a project, you get to see all tasks within that project. But sometimes you want someone to only see one task within the project without seeing all the other tasks. So what happens is you simply take that task, you assign it to the external person, right? And Protomatrix will give them access only to that task, and they see it in their inbox. They don't see it in a project. You see how here I added someone who's not in the project, and Protomatrix will actually give me a notification that they would see this task in their inbox and only this task. So hopefully that answered your question, but there's multiple ways. And then also, of course, when every single project, if you go to the top right here, you can actually, if you go and select the project itself, you can actually share a read-only version of the project. And then also you can export this project as a CSV. So there's many, many ways to share the information with external people. So customize matrix columns when creating new projects. I'm not sure if you mean by changing the quadrant names. Actually, it's very simple to change quadrant name. When you go to the project details, you can click on this little eye icon right here. And in the project details here, you can actually change the quadrant colors, and then you can also change the quadrant names. In fact, if you export Protomatrix as a CSV, you can go and do all sorts of colors that you want, and then you can also change the quadrant name and so forth. Then when you import into Protomatrix, it'll automatically inherit those CSV files. All right. We do training for our business customers. So if that's something that your organization needs, you can reach out to us, helpdesk@affluence.com. Is there a fast way to install PM plugin in Teams for all projects? So that's actually an interesting question. So if you have 100 projects here, it sounds like you have a lot of projects and a lot of teams. There's no way to go and add that because that's a limitation inside Teams itself. But I assume you have a bunch of channels. So unfortunately, you have to do that individually. But that's why you have the Protomatrix extension, right, inside Teams. And so you just open that and access all your projects. Repeatable tasks. Actually, that's a great question about repeatable tasks. There's actually several ways for us to tackle those repeatable tasks. The first is you can actually create let's just say here, I'll give you an example. So I'll go ahead and create a project here. And so I'll just do it live. I'll do a project here, and we'll call this weekly financial tasks, okay? So here you create a project called weekly financial tasks. We'll go ahead and click next. And then you mentioned how these are repeated tasks every single week. So I'm going to go ahead and do task 1, do today, task 2, do tomorrow. And then, here we use high priority, medium, and low priority, but you can change the quadrant name instead. I'm going to say task 3 due in 2 days. Okay, so now suddenly I have a bunch of tasks. So now you have this one project that represents all the tasks that you have, sales, payrolls. In fact, actually, that's what I would change this to. You could do this as sales, do this as payroll, and then go ahead and accounting. So this is a really, really straightforward example. And so now suddenly I've changed the quadrant names. It has nothing to do with priorities anymore, but it's different categories of tasks: sales, payrolls, and accounting. You see, Matrix updated that. Once you created this, you simply go to the top right, save as a template. And now what happens is you click create templates. So every single week, you just simply go to project, create project. And instead of actually creating those projects over and over again, you simply go to my templates, and then you choose your weekly financial task right here. And then you just choose the start date, and Matrix will automatically set all those tasks for you. And then once a week, you just do one of those projects. You can change the project name as every whatever week it is, and then once you're done, you can archive that. Now, of course, Matrix has recurring due dates on the tasks as well. But actually, if you have the same task over and over again and you have a lot of tasks, I actually kind of recommend that approach I just showed you. Yes, so we do have the recording, and I'll send the recording to everybody afterwards. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for all the questions, everyone. Those were fantastic questions. I'll go ahead and end the event here. If you have additional questions, please go ahead and send me an email, hi@affluence.com. If you have help-related questions, helpdesk@affluence.com. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.